so guys, we are going to start in around 2 minutes, so in case you have any friends who are somewhere like downstairs or whatever, just let them know. And well, there is a menu. If you want to order something, then just go downstairs. There's drinks or anything in here, so I'm just going to leave it there, and if you need it, just get it fast. And yeah, well, welcome to Maastricht Open, although today is an unofficial day. We'll do all of the opening and nice stuff tomorrow, but for now I think we'll introduce Jure, who is one of our CEs. So Jure has been debating in Slovenia and now he's debating at Oxford, and yeah, he broke at several tournaments, but I think you guys already all saw it on the Facebook page and stuff. So I think actions speak louder than words, and while, you know, in debating words are actions, so I guess we'll just let Jure start.
Thank you. So hi again, everyone. So like as it is said, like if you wanna at any point like go downstairs and drink or like whatever, that's perfectly fine. Like I want this to be like quite informal. I don't want to like talk at you for an hour, say absolutely useless shit. Like it would be like much more useful to get some feedback and to see sort of like where you want this session to go. So what this is going to be broadly about, like the title of the session was intentionally a bit ambiguous, right? Because of that very reason, so we can sort of work our way around the problems that people want to talk about. But what it's broadly going to be about, it's about sort of how to choose your case that you want to run in a debate, and sort of broadly about the issues of strategy that tie into that. So basically, we're going to talk about everything that's not rebuttal and that's not an argument, but that you still say in your speech. I think that's a good way to think about it, right? So everything you have to say and everything you have to think about in order for your rebuttal and your arguments to make sense, because they never make sense on their own, right? You can't make them in isolation, right? To do that, we're going to start with a motion, and we're just going to do like a prep session together to just gauge some ideas, and hopefully by the end of this motion prep, I'll be able to illustrate what I sort of mean by case, choice, and strategy. I might fail miserably, and it might be completely useless, in which case I'll ramble a bit more about what I think strategy is. All right. So the motion, and let's all pretend we're on the government side, right? So we're proposing a motion, and we're going to try and come up with some ideas to begin with. By the way, show of hands, has anyone been to Manchester IB this year? Cool. Okay, because I'm stealing this motion from Manchester. So if anyone's an economist and they have an objection, it's not my fault. So the motion is, I'm going to read it out and I'm going to write it down as well. So this house, as IMF, would finance...
IMF? Are you sure about that?
What all?
It were like 3 actors.
Yeah, no. That was... I think there's probably a better wording of that motion, which is just IMF. This house as IMF would finance the poorest 10% of the world's population rather than trying to bail out Greece. Like it was worded differently, but that's the wording we're going to go with. So basically, as IMF, you'd rather give money, so direct monetary transaction, to the poorest 10% of the population in this world rather than to Greece, right?
Empathy.
Hogwarts, chill.
Guys, by the way, can everybody see it, or shall we move a flip chart a bit, or? Yeah, maybe.
And we are recording this with this, so
okay.
If you could.
It's one thing to see it and another thing to understand his handwriting, but...
No chill. No chill.
I realize there's probably a shit wording on this motion, but you get the general idea what this motion is about, right? So basically, just to clarify, right, this is about the international, IMF, basically allocating the money that it currently gives to Greece, trying to bail it out of the financial crisis, allocating that same money to the 10% of the world's poorest population, and we're arguing like for the motion, right? So I'll give you like a minute to think about it, and then I want to hear some ideas as to like how you'd approach this motion. So what you think is important in this debate, and how you would sort of try and approach it. And you can just shout out ideas.
So basically, like, prioritize the issue that of course people have, then you prioritize the issue that Greece has, and then you weigh them up. No, I don't want to speak up.
No, please do speak up. And if other people can be silent, so people can, like, we can hear people, that'd be great.
Basically, I guess what you want to do is just characterize the issue that of course people have, and then the issue that Greece has, and then why is it more important that of course people get the help, and why will it be more effective, basically.
Okay. So sort of weighing the issue. And what was the other thing?
So characterizing the issues and then weighing them up against each other in terms of how effective the help would be and how big the problems are, I guess.
Okay, so I think this is broadly good, yeah. Can we, so I think like weighing of the issues is sort of like, I think it's like a generic way for debaters to just say like there's a debate, which I like, I agree. I think the second one is much more specific, and I think it's,
Sorry.
The second one is probably, I think, much more specific. So would you mind elaborating a little bit on like what do you think the issues of effectiveness and how big the problems are? Like what does that mean in context of that debate?
I guess if you talk about how big the problems are, you can actually, if you're a government, prove that the poorest people need it a lot more than the rich.
Okay.
And then even if you have proven that they need it a lot more, then you still haven't proven that they can actually use it well. So, I mean, you can really need the money, but then if you're going to throw it away to, I don't know, on blackjack and hookers, then you're still not really going to do much with it. So you also have to prove that actually this money is going to do good stuff.
Okay, so what would you say on government then in terms of trying to advance this case, right? Because I think that the arguments, just to clarify in a second, just to clarify the advance, I think like arguments are like broadly intuitive, right? So like if we give poor people money, fewer of them are going to die, and that's a good thing. If we give Greece money, it's less, you know, it's also good because like more Greek people get money, and that's also presumably good, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd make a comparison saying that if Greece doesn't get the money, worst case scenario is probably that the economy goes a bit to shit, a lot of people are out of a job, but probably most people will still have a roof over their head and still be able to like feed themselves, whereas the poorest 10% of the world population is literally dying of starvation or almost dying of starvation. So if you help those people and are able to like teach them how to grow their own food or whatsoever, you can like both save a lot of lives and like help them in the future as well, so that it's making a bigger impact because you're just saving a lot more lives and so that money can do just sort of more than it can do in Greece.
Yeah, you had something?
Yeah, I'd like link potential impacts to why they serve the purposes and aims of the IMF in particular.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, we should ask why the IMF should, contrary to its prior praxis, fund poor directly instead of countries.
Okay.
And like the aim the IMF has is, I think, like enhancing global financial stability, for instance.
Okay. But say the fewer people dying and more people having access to food and basic services is broadly in line with financial stability. Do you think it would be fair to say that like IMF has a broadly same incentives when it comes to Greece and when it comes to the world's poor, or would you differentiate those two and say they are somehow inherently different?
well, if we only weight the impacts, and I don't know why this house as the IMF would be in the motion, because then it would be only like weighting impacts in general.
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that?
Sorry, I don't.
So when you say it would just be weighting impacts, like how would that be different when you talk about Greece or when you talk about the world's poor? Like why is weighing impacts in this case relevant for the way in which you can make arguments?
Okay, yeah, because the IMF was, when it was created with Bretton Woods and everything, was created in order to enhance global financial stability and help states and so on and so on.
Okay.
And I think we should consider why it now is important to just operate for the good of people instead of global financial stability.
Okay.
Do you see where I come from? Like linking it to the actor, or
Yeah.
am I on the wrong path?
No, I think it's fine.
Maybe adding to that, you could
I know you can't say just like so, like more or less reminder. So yeah, go.
like adding to that, you could probably characterize why the IMF is giving money to Greece in the first place.
Yeah.
And then if you characterize and give a nice picture, a nice image, then you could like turn it into, well, we could also do that with the poorest 10% of the world, and they deserve it more.
Okay. Okay, so we have a couple of ideas, right? So broadly we have the idea of justice, so who deserves the money more. We have the idea of the purposes of the IMF, so when does IMF fulfill its purposes the best. We have the idea of sort of purely consequentialist harms, right? So which side saves more lives in terms of, you know, what is the worst case scenario if these people don't get the money. But is it clear to everyone that all these ideas fundamentally rely on the first idea that we got, which is the idea of effectiveness, right? Because regardless of what you think your priority is in this debate, and regardless of which of those three arguments you're going to make, either it's an argument of justice, the purpose of the actor, or the consequences, in order for any of those three to stand, you're going to have to show that this policy is effective, right? So strategically speaking, the most powerful case, and say you're closing government, right? Strategically speaking, a very powerful case in this scenario, then recognizing that sort of hierarchy of arguments, would probably be to discuss effectiveness, right? Because that allows you to say, look, regardless of whether we care about justice, regardless of whether we care about the number of lives we save, regardless of whether we care about the purposes of the IMF and why it was created and whom it helps, none of that matters unless one of the sides shows that this either works or doesn't work, or that it works in one case, i.e. perhaps it works for poor people, and it doesn't work for Greece, or vice versa, right? Does that make sense? So in a sense, what you do then is... Oh, come on. This is meant to be like much smoother and more dramatic. So you have the idea of justice, you have the idea of purpose, and you have the idea of consequences. But all these are necessarily underscored by the idea of effectiveness. Now, let's chat about effectiveness a little bit. So, if anyone does economics, feel free to call me out on this, but I'm going to claim that this works in debate land. And by the way, I'm deliberately choosing examples of debates I've been in because I sort of can, to some extent, claim what worked or didn't work. So let's chat about effectiveness briefly. Well, what's sort of like what's the scale of Greece's debt at the moment in terms, like, just in relation to its assets or its GDP?
183%.
Yeah. I had 170, but 183 works. Yeah. And I'm sure you're right, because so Greece's debt is currently 183% of its GDP, right? Since when are we trying to bail out Greece?
210.
Yeah, probably around 210. 210. Let's say 210.
May 210.
How many governments has Greece had since we've been trying to bail it out? Yeah, let's go.
Well, if we can't restructure in three.
Sorry?
If we can't restructure in three.
Okay, so 3. Alright. So 3 governments, 7 years of bailing out, and they're still 183% of their GDP. Their debt is still 183% of their GDP. It seems plausible, at least in debate land, in a 7-minute speech, given those 3 facts, to claim that regardless of whether we bail out Greece or not, it's not going to make much difference to whether Greece repays its debt or not, right? You can at least plausibly convince judges of that in a 7-minute speech, right? So then, within that framework, your argument becomes much, much stronger, because regardless of what the opening half has said, yeah, go on.
Oh yeah, but sorry, can you really do the same for the other case as well? Because, I mean, how long have we been giving aid to poor people by now?
I don't think we've given like monetary transactions to the poorest of the world's poor.
Direct
Depends on the
Direct
we
tax
assume. Or
Oh, I didn't really get that.
Go.
But that's the second half. Like I agree, that's a perfectly legitimate challenge that opposition should raise, and I agree. But it's sort of the second half of the case. If we deal with the Greece first, the point I'm trying to get across is it's very plausible in a debating speech. Using those facts, you can convince the judges that this is going to be incredibly ineffective, right? So even if we keep bailing Greece out, right, we've been doing it for 7 years, they've had 3 different governments with like broadly, vastly different ideological beliefs. Their debt is still massive, right? So it's not working, right? So like what we're doing is not saving Greece from some financial disaster. Pretty much what we're doing is like sort of like keeping it afloat, right? If you were confident enough, you could go a step further and go, this means that Greece necessarily needs to default on its debt sooner or later, and there's no difference if they do it now or in 10 years' time, right? The consequences are going to be completely the same. We might just do it now, actually, because like it's better to default because you suddenly know which political issues you're voting on, you know like what your economic situation is. You can't do that when you keep using all your public funds to repay your debt, right? So this might be, there are obviously economic flaws with that argument, but at least you can make that argument. And you have shown 2 things, right? 1, this is not effective. And 2, because it's going to have to default anyway, and this one's probably more questionable, but you can probably do it, because it has to default anyway, the consequences are completely the same, right? So, this is universally accepted sign for they're the same. So it doesn't matter, right? So instead of dealing with 3 different arguments that the opening half has put forward about Greece and about having to repay, having to finance its debt crisis and yada yada yada, instead of dealing them separately, you identify an underlying assumption in the case. And by talking about that, you make the same rebuttal much more effectively. Because now you no longer have to, defend, Greek people, like not having access to money or like public education or public hospitals. You no longer have to discuss the purpose of the IMF. You no longer have to like say if it's just or not, because it doesn't matter, because it doesn't work, right? So you've identified something in the case that is strategically the most important and the most useful way to structure your arguments in that debate, right? So then we can briefly, like, this was the purpose of like pretty much this intro case study motion thing, but we can very briefly like chat about the world's poor and like the second half of the motion if people want to do that, but it doesn't really get the same the same point of strategy across, right? Because the purpose is not to prep motions, the purpose is to illustrate why strategy is important. So I think we're probably going to move on. I have like some motions at the end which we can prep again and go through in the same way that I think might be useful. But just like, is everyone happy with that? With the general idea of like why strategy is important and why the way you choose your case is important? Because it massively alleviates your burden in the debate as to what you have to show in order to make your case effective. Yeah?
Just to be clear, could you also just bring a case where you say it's not effective in either ways, and therefore like something like purpose or justice matters more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's the second part of the case is basically saying, look, it doesn't work. This is basically wasted money. So at least if we show that we save some lives of the poorest of the poor, because at least some of them get some money they can buy food with.
No, generally speaking, like taking out the effectiveness by saying it's not effective either way.
But if it's not effective, then like once you show it's not effective, it's really easy to go back on that and use one of those arguments for your side. Because if they don't count on their side, they're equally not going to count on yours if you've shown that the policy isn't going to manifest anyway. Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably go for an even if case. So you say,
yeah,
we're not, like I'm explaining you for 4 minutes why it's not effective, and then you say even if in some magical way CO convinces the judges as to why it would be effective, then we still think it's not like is that the purpose of the IMF, or like has worse consequences, or because then you sort of cover yourself at 2 levels. So even if they destroy one part of your case, you still have the second part standing, you still win.
I agree. Like I mean, like if you want to be extra sure that like one of those isn't claimed by opposition, say like for example opening up spends like 2 speeches explaining the justice point, and you think it's really strong. You think you've taken it down with your effectiveness, right? You explain why it's an underlying assumption in your case, but you're not 100% sure the judges are buying it. Then like you should probably like do an even if rebuttal like to that part of the case as well. Like, it's perfectly fine. It's, in most cases, quite useful, right? But say like you're running really short in time, or like you have a lot of material to cover, because obviously there's a complete like second part to this case, which is about like why financing poor people like is useful, right? And you're likely going to struggle for time and so on. I just think that strategically it is very effective to recognize the underlying assumption of the case and to question like the basic premise of like all the arguments that the top half or like your opposition or whomever has been making, right? Does that make sense? I think just like at this point, like I think like generally what you're gonna encounter like quite often is, this is a pictorial representation of this idea because I can't really explain very well, but say that every argument has sort of analysis on one end. I can't spell, so this might well be wrong. And impacts on the other. Right? So you go from basic analysis and you build your case up to impacts, right? You say, X is bad because, X is going to happen because X, Y, Z, and from that follows A, B, C, and C is bad because of reasons, D, E, F, like your A, B, C are analysis, D, E, F are impacts. So you're often going to find like cases that are structured something like this, or something like this. Right? And I almost feel like this case, like it's something very similar to that, right? So people like try and overwhelm you with impacts, and they say, giving money to Greece is going to be amazing because, it fulfills the aim of justice, it fulfills the aim of what IMF has been set up for, and it has all these positive benefits to the Greek people, right? They're just overwhelming the case, with impacts, basically, right? They haven't proven, it's very thin on analysis, right? And there are a couple of basic assumptions that you can then tackle, right? Equally, that's not really the point of this session, but oftentimes people are going to have cases that are very well analyzed, they're just a little bit irrelevant, and you should probably point that out as well, right? It doesn't really No, I know it's funny, but oftentimes people prove things very, very well, and you just go a bit okay. Good analysis there. Yeah, but obviously you should explain why there was no impact and why you don't care about it. Especially in debating, people oftentimes go something like, oh, and then more people are become right wing or something like that. And you're just yeah, fine. I know that oftentimes there are political assumptions in debate land as to what people ought to believe, but sometimes it is just it doesn't make an argument. Okay. Any questions about that, or anything anyone wanted to raise? Does it broadly make sense? Does it broadly come across what I'm trying to say with an example? Okay, cool.
One thing though.
Yeah.
I know that arguing that more life saved is of course always a good thing in debating, but here there's a good chance of argument that if you give so much money to the poor, the children who normally die, well, now they survive, and you suddenly have a huge influx of people who's gonna be, well, in some 20 years, they're gonna go to labor market, and well, we don't have an economy that could accommodate them, so that could be a real problem. And could that work?
I mean, yes, but I think like in general, if you can show that like people don't die, that's more powerful than showing we might struggle to find them jobs in 20 years' time.
Well, but that can lead to a big effects, like, well, if we don't find them jobs, we're gonna have lots of unemployed people, we're gonna have lots of unemployed people, the crime rises, and
I mean,
you know, the chain of happenings.
It's probably true that like overpopulation can be a problem. I still think that like, in those debates, it's going to be very hard to convince your judge that like letting people to die is better than like having an overpopulated country. Like I just think it's something that people take on face value, like that people not dying is probably better. Okay. Cool. So a couple of other things then on that. So basically, I hope it should be clear by now, but like sort of like case selection, strategy, all those like fancy words, and like I don't know, like people say like framing or like characterizing or like whatever. I think like all those probably broadly mean the same thing. It's just like, you know, illustrating what the debate is about, right? Because like obviously like, you can always make arguments, and sometimes like arguments can be like, you can literally have the same argument on both sides. It's just gonna, like the difference is just gonna be like from which sort of like viewpoint you approach it, right? And it's probably true like also like of political discussions like in actual politics, like outside of debating, right? So like if you compare like someone who's like a socialist and someone who's a libertarian, they're like, ultimately they both want people to have like maximize liberties and, you know, like not being poor and all that. It's just gonna, like, the only difference is like what mechanisms they're gonna use, how they're gonna ideologically approach a problem, which groups they're gonna prioritize, and so on, right? The argument, people deserve to be happy, people deserve to have liberty, and people shouldn't die of hunger, is the same on both sides, right? The only difference is like on whom you focus, and so on, right? So I think the same is true of debating, right? Like oftentimes you're not gonna disagree about like very basic things, right? And if someone is selling you an argument and they've proven, you know, beyond reasonable doubt, right, that like a policy, you know, saves lives, like whatever, right? That's probably not something you can dispute, right? Or like you're not really gonna go like, oh, we think that's a bad thing, right? You're probably gonna show something more fundamental wrong with their case, and there's usually gonna be something, right? And those are usually like issues of strategy, right? So I think oftentimes just in terms of like structuring, like how you frame your case and where this comes into your speech, right? I think it's important to recognize that like all positions, right? So from opening government to closing opposition, like everyone has to have an element of strategy in their case, right? Everyone has to sort of know where their case is going. Unfortunately, what oftentimes happens is that like opening government sort of has this grand idea. They're like, oh, so here are the definitions of the debate. Here's the problem we're going to solve, right? But then you see like all the other teams just sort of going, here's our first argument, or like, this is the rebuttal, this is the argument. I find this like oftentimes quite problematic, right? It's good to like sort of have a minute or 30 seconds at the beginning where you explain what the underlying assumptions of the debate so far have been, which ones you agree with, which ones you dispute, and where your case comes into the debate, right? So I think this is a time to, you know, explain your strategy, right? Because like people oftentimes assume that, you know, like rebuttal and arguments are what you actually say, and everything else is there just mentally to facilitate your case, right? It doesn't have to be the case, right? You can say these things out loud to the judge, because it's going to make it easier for the judge to understand where your rebuttal and arguments are fitting in as well, right? At the same time, what I have found quite useful, and I like really recommend like doing that, is like if you actually say what your strategy is, if you actually say what things are important to you in your debate, which assumptions you're going to focus on, why you're making the arguments that you're making, it forces you to only say things that are actually important. Because oftentimes you find yourself like literally just saying, you know, like decent analysis, this is the thing we discussed earlier, right? You can have decent analysis, but then at the end of your point, you just stood there in front of a judge and you're like, yeah, this is falling short of, you know, like a debate winning point. Like I've analyzed it well, but I'm not really sure where this is going, right? And I feel like if you explicitly state your aims, right? If you force yourself to have like 1 page of your speech and 30 seconds to perhaps 1 minute of your speech dedicated to explaining why you're saying the things you're saying, not just saying them, that forces you to then filter out all the useless crap that you don't actually have to say, you don't actually want to say. It lets you focus more specifically on things that are debate winning and that fit into your case, right? And like, I feel like, again, like, just a sec, I feel like, again, like all teams should do that. Like, I feel like closing teams oftentimes have this tendency to make it seem like they're doing that, but they really aren't, because like they just go like, oh, here's a completely new aspect of this debate and everyone has missed, and then they just like say stuff that's already been said. So just like, if you think that's the case, no, like people are gonna notice if you do that. Like, I mean, like I do it as well. Like, if you think that's the case before you stand up in front of the podium, like interrogate those assumptions, right? Like spend like a minute, like thinking about what you've missed and how you can make it genuinely new or like genuinely different, or how you can genuinely like challenge new assumptions and new strategies, rather than just saying you are, because like judges are going to notice. I think the teams that most often miss this aspect of debating are probably OO, right? Because closing, you sort of know you have to be new, and OG, you sort of, by definition, are new because no one's spoken yet. But then like, when you're OO, you're sort of like, oh, we know what the case is because OG has defined it, and like we don't have to worry about extensions, right? And then like you fall into the trap of like not explaining what your case is or like where it fits into debate.
So, would you rather say why your case is important, or explicitly say why it's debate winning? So do you compare yourself explicitly to other teams and say why you win it over other teams, or do you more want to focus on just saying why you're important in general?
So I think that depends a lot on the context, right? I think like sometimes, you know, obviously like sometimes it's going to be impossible, because if you're opening government, it's really hard to go like, oh, this is why we win over closing opposition, because, you know, Mark is going to say X, because I know him very well, right? Or whatever, right?
Say you're a gov whip or CEO.
Yeah, if you're gov whip or like if you're up whip, I think it's incredibly powerful to just go like, look, here's the assumption that opening government makes. Here is how closing government perpetuates this assumption, and here are the reasons why that assumption is fundamentally illegitimate or like fundamentally untrue. You deconstruct it, and it becomes like immediately clear that like a lot of the case on both gov teams is falling. I think that's perfectly fine. I think if you're opening, you have to rely sort of more on like judges' intuition that something is important, right? You have to be like, look, like this is important because things about world rather than meta debatey things, right? Because like people haven't spoken yet, right? If you're OO, you can do that about OG, I suppose, and like vice versa, like for DPM. But most of the time, it's not going to be as evidently clear, right? And it might sound less convincing because like if you focus specifically just on the other team, and you still have two teams speaking, like it doesn't necessarily deal with their cases. But if you make it like more generally applicable, if you go like, this is why in the general world, like as human beings, we care about a thing, I think it remains applicable for the entirety of the debate.
And then if say you're in first half and you say we think that in order to win the debate, someone needs to explain why this happens or that this happens, we think that's what debate winning. Would you say that explicitly, or just say
definitely.
we think this is important?
So I think, I actually don't know, like, cause I did world school before I did VP, and like in world schools you just have two teams, so it's much easier to do that because like if you're like no one's opening, so you sort of know what the case is of the what the case of the other team is when you're speaking. But if you do know what sort of has to be proven on the other side, I would definitely explicitly state that burden, right? I would explicitly say something like, look, if opposition wants to win today, they have to explain why X, Y, Z is true. And to go even further, right? Because like now you're just stating the question. Now like if opposition extension stands up and they go like, oh, this is why this is true, they're gonna beat you, right? But if you say like opposition have to show that X, Y, Z is true in order to win this debate, but here is why we think they can't show it because it's untrue, then you know, again, it forces you to make the right kinds of arguments, right? This is exactly the thing I was explaining earlier, right? Don't just say what the burden is, go a step further, and that's going to force you to make the argument that directly clashes with what you think is the most important bit in the debate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you're going to oftentimes find that, like, if you do that effectively, so if you spend like a minute on an argument that's basically not really an argument, but rather like framing / characterization / strategy / whatever you want to call it, oftentimes it's going to cut out like quite a lot of your rebuttal, or it's going to allow you to say something like, look, opening is wrong because of this reason, and this reason is like very much connected with what you explained in the first minute, so your rebuttal is going to be much, much shorter, right? You're not going to find yourself explaining the very basic assumptions of your case over and over again if you state them explicitly at the beginning. You know, just state the main ideas at the beginning, because you can keep referring back to them, and it just like cuts down the, you know, sort of just like the number of words you have to say, but your word economy is like necessarily better. Does it make sense? Shall we do another motion?
Yes.
Cool.
By the way, guys, are you temperature-wise? Is it good? Because I closed the window.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect. Right. Just making sure.
Alan, give me my water. It's somewhere here.
Okay. So, again, this is again Manchester for some reason. It's this house believes that immigrants should collectively strike for their rights. Right? So instead of like a particular trade union or a particular profession striking, it would be immigrants across sectors, or like in some specific sectors or whatever. But just people who fundamentally don't identify with a particular job, but rather as immigrants. So.
All over the world.
No, probably in one country. I mean, depends on how much you want.
What exactly do you mean by immigrants who strike for their rights?
Okay, any ideas? And like you can give me arguments, but like now hopefully we're closer to understanding that this session is not really about arguments, and the first session was just a trick or like whatever. So if you want to, you can sort of try and approach clashes or questions of strategy, questions of what is it that you need to identify in order to make your case as strong as possible in this debate. Yeah.
Yes, I think for this motion you need to prove two things. SRG, I think you need to prove one that strikes.
Yeah, let's do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That strikes in general work, and then two, you have to prove why striking as a collective as immigrants works better than striking as a branch, or why a branch might not always represent immigrants best, or something along those lines.
And then also, I think it might be very necessary to show that they are actually a necessity, because their rights is quite a big thing, and immigrants are generally not one homogeneous group. So it's probably quite necessary to show that they have one common interest that they all have to strike for.
So I think this is very, very good, right? Because we already identify what I think are two key issues in this debate, right? So one is when you say we have to show that immigrants striking collectively is better than striking in separate trade unions and trying to extract concessions. And obviously the immediate opposition response to that is, well, it's not, because, you know, people in trade unions have same kinds of requirements most of the time, whereas like all the immigrants across different sectors, you know, like from, you know, a brain surgeon from India to, you know, like a manual worker from like Germany are gonna have like profoundly different kinds of concessions they're trying to extract, right? Did you have a point as well?
Yeah.
I saw like a hand somewhere there.
I was thinking that why is the alternative necessarily like striking as a trade union rather than the alternative being some sort of like political movement that doesn't involve strikes at all? Because it seems to me that a big point for government would be that if you strike as a trade union, it doesn't really have anything to do with immigrant rights. So even if you improve the rights of manual laborers, it's not going to make that much of a difference to immigrants in general.
Okay.
So if I were op, I probably wouldn't. I would just say that strikes shouldn't be a part of their advocacy at all.
Okay. Right. So how would you get around that as Gov then? And say that argument has been made because it's probably going to be made on the OO because I think it's probably the right op case, right? Or at least a part of the right op case.
They're not mutually exclusive. You can still like do a lot of things, but if you prove that strikes at least are in some way effective, then it helps your case to do it.
Okay.
So you can still go to the street and protest and do all kinds of other things.
I mean, op is presumably going to show that they're counterproductive to other incentives, but yeah, I suppose the immediate response would probably be not mutually exclusive.
So yeah, maybe you could like propose there are like better alternatives.
Like what?
Yeah, I don't know yet.
So if we focus on that part, because I do think that's key, like, let's chat about that a little bit. So, we already know that in order to win this debate, we'll have to show that there are cases where immigrants have very common interests, right? So they share interests between, like, all immigrants in a particular setting, in a particular scenario that you're going to talk about as a government team, share a particular interest. And you also have to show that like this works, right? Especially after an explicit challenge from like OO that says basically, you know, there are other avenues, you know, like there are political parties that cater to immigrant rights, there are like NGOs, there are rights groups, and strikes are actively counterproductive. So how are you going to show, what are you going to focus on? What stakeholders or what situations or what cases do you want to focus on if you want to show that there's some commonality between immigrants in terms of the sort of concessions they want to extract from the governments, and it's also going to work? Okay, so this is what happened in the debate. I was in on the notion that closing government won with what I thought was a interesting case. I'm not completely like. It was a very interesting case. It was very, very well done, and they won by a landslide, right? And it was basically just saying, look. Like, it's not true that in all cases immigrants are going to have common interests, and it's not true that this is like going to work in all cases, right? But it would be insane to demand of people that they have to defend a motion in all possible circumstances, right? So instead, what they're going to focus on, or like what we as closing government are going to focus on, were strikes where in private sector, with companies that have a high proportion of manual laborers who are immigrants. Because they have common interests in terms of just, for example, like better protection in, I don't know, like places of work, right? For example, like higher minimum wage, like being able to like reunite with their families, like extracting like some concessions from either their employer in terms of like families' rights to visit and stuff like that, right? There seem to be a lot of common things that manual laborers have in common in private sector, right? And the concessions they're going to extract, like the act they're going to extract it from, it's not necessarily going to be the government, it's going to be the employer themselves, right? And that gets rid of a lot of the issues that OP is going to raise about, you know, public backlash or the perception of immigrants, especially when they say that in a private sector, because of profit maximizing incentives, you only have to threaten a strike in order to extract concessions, because like whatever factory or like whatever, you know, coffee shop or whatever doesn't want to lose profit over the entirety of the staff, or like vast chunk of the staff going on a strike for a couple of days, right? And you've proven both things, right? you've proven that there is a commonality, like, I'm not even sure if it's a word, like, hope it is. There are common interests that immigrants in that particular sector share, right, in terms of what kinds of rights they want, regardless of the country they come from, to some extent regardless of the skill set that they possess. And secondly, that it is going to work, because everyone in the debate is making an assumption this is about the public sector and about, or like most people at least in most debates, or at least the one I was in, or like the way we discussed it so far, I think that was an implicit assumption that this is about jobs in the public sector. If you reframe it as a debate in the private sector, it's much easier to show why, because of profit maximizing incentives, like people are going to be much more willing to give in to those demands that immigrant workers hold, right? Does that make sense?
I have just one question.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know if it's relevant to the debate, but I feel like it should be, because these examples, why I don't see, except for maybe the family reunion part, why it's specifically relevant to immigrants and why immigrants should do it rather than just manual labor strikes. Because I think native manual laborers will also like things like better protection, higher work, higher minimum wage.
Sure, like presumably it's all right for like government to say, yeah, we would support it as well, but like in this particular case, like we think this would be effective, it would be beneficial, right? The two are not mutually exclusive in a sense, right? And I suppose you could probably argue that like oftentimes there are particular issues surrounding like immigrants in terms of like violation of rights in the workplace, right? It's not uncommon for immigrants, you know, to have particular rights violated to a greater extent than people who are residents of the country, right? But even if you just like, even if you go like, even in the extreme, right? Like even if you're completely right and like none of those like are something you can run, as a serious, I think you probably can. But even if it's just like stuff like family reunion rights or like visa extensions and stuff like that, even then, like these benefits can be minor, but they're so much more plausible than, you know, trying to show that like on a large government scale, you know, a strike of immigrants is going to convince people who actually have the right to vote for a different government or something like that, right? Because like let's not forget, like immigrants aren't going to have a right to vote, right? So even if your impacts are much smaller, they're much more believable. And the strategic choice you make here is to recognize what are going to be the two things that make this case believable or like plausible, right? What are the main two underlying assumptions that people are making? Addressing them, choosing a scenario, choosing a stakeholder in which you think you can probably show that both are fulfilled, and then you run that case, right? So I think it's an interesting example of how like you go for a much less spectacular case, but by correctly recognizing what the assumptions are and what you need to prove, you can run a case that's much more effective and much more believable, right? And as it was, I think this can be an incredibly effective case. Though I'm not claiming I've done it justice in the session, but I hope the general idea came across. Any questions about this? It is about 9. Like we can do like another like case prep, or like if people just like want to get like beer and food, that's also fine. Yeah.
Do you guys want to go over one more case and then be done? Whatever you party.
I'm perfectly conscious of the fact it's quite late, so like if people just like want to get.
Oh no, I mean that's fine. We started 15 minutes later, okay. So if you have anything planned, I think. Yeah. And guys, if you want, you can also go downstairs and get some stuff up here. So if you, one of the people, can go out of your friends, whatever you choose.
Do people want to do like one case or the? So. Okay. We're going to do another motion. We're going to have a similar chat. I think this is from Australs, but we've done it as Jure's prep like a week ago, so it's fresh in my memory. So I think it's going to be interesting to discuss it. So the motion that we're gonna try and prep is going to be this house regrets the fetishization of hard labor, right? So like this house regrets a society in which we fetishize hard labor. We're gonna say hard work because I think it's better. Alright people, like 30 seconds, ideas. Like what's this debate about and like on what like sort of clash is it gonna be won?
Basically, standardization of hard work has brought about more bad than good things. In the most basic sense, obviously.
Yeah, but it's emotion, right?
So if you can prove that there have been very, very many negative impacts that are solely due to the deficit of hard work.
Okay, yes, but compared to what? What's the comparative?
I think opposition says like hard work is generally nice because with hard work you generally achieve more than with like not working hard. And proposition says, well, sure, hard work is nice, but there's also a factor of luck that's pretty big. And if you fetishize hard work, you basically are saying to the people that don't make it, you just didn't work enough, which sort of really plays into the head of racism, discrimination.
Okay. I think those are arguments. I don't think they're strategies or framings.
Fair.
Basically, do two worlds comparison, right? You do like one world in which you have this fetishization, and the other world there has never been this fetishization, and then you compare the two, and you prove that the world without is actually much better.
Okay, but say let's be opposition for this one. Is the world you're comparing this world to the world where we don't fetishize hard labor or hard work, and is this the only difference that these two worlds have? So let me ask this question like this way. What is the reason that society started fetishizing hard work?
Capitalism.
Okay, yeah, but why?
Protestant work ethic, right?
In order to improve life.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
So if you work hard, then your impact is bigger, meaning that you improve life of yourself, but also of others.
Okay.
Whereas if you would then go on God's side, if you don't do these things, then maybe you don't get, I don't know, mental illnesses or like you overwork, burnout, something like that.
Okay. I think that's broadly correct. I think so here's an idea, and I'm not saying you have to agree, but I think it's an interesting strategic idea, right? So I think we've identified part of the issue at the very beginning, saying we're comparing two worlds, right? We're comparing a world where we do fetishize hard work to a different world, but what is that world, right? And I think the key question to that is to ask ourselves, why did society start fetishizing hard work? And the answer to that is probably because like most people most of the time will have to work in order for a country to exist, right? Because you need to produce resources, and even still, like most countries in the world are quite poor, right? You need a constant workforce to work, to produce things, just so you can put things on the table, just so you have money to buy things, just so a country is not stuck at some point in progress, but can in fact improve everyone's lives, right? Presumably everyone agrees with that, right? That's the reason people work, right? Or why societies want people to work. If that's true, then they have to find some mechanism or some way in which they make people work, right? Or in which they incentivize people to work, because otherwise people won't work, and then like all those good things aren't going to happen, and states can't exist in the same way they currently do, right? And I think there's your answer, right? What are we comparing it to, right? So what are the other systems of incentives in which we make people work, right? Well, for example, we can define their ability to work or their obligation to work by, like a natural order, as we did like in feudalism, right? And just say, like some people are born, with royal blood and they're born to rule, and other people are born to work, right? You can make people work by coercion, right? But it's obviously, again, like very, very more dubious and not even dubious, right? Absolutely morally abhorrent, right? And you probably don't want to defend that, right? A third one is probably like defining people's ability to work and their obligation to work just in terms of talent, right? And like glorifying people who are most naturally talented. But again, you probably have a problem because you unfairly lock some people out. So for example, people with disabilities, people who are raised in socioeconomic backgrounds where they can't develop their talents, right? Another way to incentivize people to work would be to praise the productivity of their work rather than the work itself, right? But then again, the vast majority of people that work do not produce immediately observable outcomes, right? Vast majority of the farmers that actually make the country run, right? aren't someone that produces something that you can immediately, you know, go like, wow, that was amazing, right? People whose products we appreciate most are oftentimes, you know, like people who deal with tech, right? Or like in science and stuff like that, right? So you, again, unfairly lock out a very large chunk of population that has nothing to be appreciated, right? So I think that's the comparative then. I think that's then the strategic comparative, right? So instead of saying, no.
But can't you like say, with, for example, the farmers, okay, they are like using a very effective method which has been proven and there has been control that they are actually executing it in the right way, so we praise them?
Yeah, you can, yeah. But I think equally, because, so I think equally, right? Most of the people in every society, or like in most societies, at least in the world as it is, probably live in slightly poorer countries than like, or like definitely live in poorer countries than Western Europe is, right? Most people are going to do things that do not have immediately observable outcomes, right? Even if you're a really good farmer, right? Or if you're a bad farmer, that probably shouldn't impact on like whether you're, how much you're appreciated by a society, right? Or at least that's the argument or not, right? And because you don't produce immediately observable outcomes, then if we judge you on productivity solely, right? And only productivity, right? You're going to be seen as someone who has to be appreciated less by the society than someone who perhaps works less, but produces more sensational and more observable outcomes. Does that make sense? Does it answer the question?
Yeah, well, of course it makes sense. But then, like, I think that's very debatable, right? Or,
yeah.
Or,
I mean, I'm not saying there's a bulletproof all.
Yeah, no,
I'm just like pitching an idea for a strategy.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because you are now naming opposition, like alternatives to hard work, but would it be possible if you're Gov, I think? No? Yeah, Gov, to also attack, like, take the alternatives to like statistization, because statistization is quite an extreme way of looking at it, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that's one of the government. So I think like I would expect opening government to say something along the lines of, you know, we are fine with people appreciating hard work. We are fine with, you know, taking into account that as a part of their personality, but we think it's gone way too far, right? I think that would be the Gov, you know, the Gov setup from opening government. So I totally agree. Like Gov probably wants to make that out, right? But I think you need quite a specific and quite a strong argument to show that the outcomes and the progress of the society would be equally enabled by, you know, softer measures, right? Yeah.
And in terms of like specifically characterizing how effective the measure that you're discussing in terms of your graduate supporting it, I think this came up in feedback from like the London Light and something like. It's a bit of a question of how effective you want it to be. So on government, do you want it to be coercively effective on people that it is fetishized, or do you want it to be a factor in their decision making?
Yeah, so I think that's the whole discussion, right? So I think that's definitely true, but I think that on op, you can probably argue something along the lines of, look, I mean, if the alternative is outright state coercion to work, and this is just sort of like social coercion, right? It fetishizes something, but still like no one's holding a gun against your head, right? This still allows you more freedom, more agency, and more ability to, you know, like, it's gonna sound very 2008 in debating jargon, but to self-actualize. Than the alternative, right, which is outright coercion, right? So again, like, I don't know how this case actually plays out in real life because I haven't seen it, but I think it's an idea of a strategy that you probably could think about in this debate in terms of what worlds you're comparing, right? Because I think it allows you to be much clearer as to like why this is a good thing, right? Because note that like under that strategy, right? The strategy allows you to bite a lot of government harms, right? Because you don't even have to show that fetishization of hard work is good. Coming back to the first thing you said, which is like, is it, you know, does it have more benefits or harms? You don't even have to show that. You just have to show that all the other alternative mechanisms are worse, right? And then you still have legitimate grounds to say that you don't regret it, because whilst it might not be amazing, it's the best out of the alternatives. And we have seen historically other systems of incentivizing people to work play out, right? And they've been usually based on, you know, like definitions of like natural ability to work, natural order, right? And have usually, like, in a second, usually ended up being just very exclusionary to like large chunks of population.
But how do you plausibilize that it's not possible to have a like neutral or healthy stance on hard work, as proposition will probably suggest?
Because I think the argument then becomes that you need something to incentivize people to work if you want your society to exist, right? Because if people don't work hard, and vast majority of the like, if you just think about like the vast majority of the world, right? The vast majority of the countries in the world probably like desperately need to develop even faster than they're currently developing, right? Because they're not living in an amazing state, right? So taking that on board, right? It's probably quite easy to show that you need some mechanism, some quite strong mechanism to incentivize people to work, because otherwise countries aren't going to develop and people die at the age of 40 of like preventable diseases and stuff like that, right? Like it's the goal of development, right? So once you show that, then you can show we need very strong mechanisms to make people, work, because that's what that development is contingent on. And then you say here's a range of historical mechanisms that governments have used or that societies have developed. We think this is the least harmful one because it at least allows for some agency and it gives some dignity to people who carry out this hard work.
So like in terms of healthy attitude toward work, an individual's healthy attitude toward work doesn't necessarily fulfill that objective, right? Because an individual could say, I want to work just enough to have a nice life.
Yeah.
That's a perfectly healthy attitude for
Yeah.
an individual to have, but if your country needs you to work significantly harder than that, then that could be the priority that on ultimate effect.
Yeah, so I think it's like important to recognize that like even within societies where you fetishize hard work, which argue that the vast majority of Western societies are, like not everyone works incredibly hard. People still have other priorities, right? It's not that like it's the only thing we suddenly care about is like stay in your job for 12 hours, right? Like pretty much like no one probably does that, right? People still care about other things, right? It's just like having a very strong priority as a society to value people who work hard as opposed to people who work less hard, right? Sort of regardless of outcomes. Does that sort of make sense? Any questions on that? Any questions about the session in general?
I have a general question.
Yeah.
So sort of getting general in Europe, you have to have something that is the most important thing in debate, and then your arguments are about that. But how do you arrive at your strategies about you have certain arguments and then come up with a strategy in which those arguments are important? Or is it about developing a skill that you see, oh, this is the most important thing, isn't it? Think about and then...
So I think that's a very valid question. I think it's a combination of both, right? So like, I think one thing is like just like when you do like enough debates, sometimes it's just gonna become like quite intuitive. You'll be like, I've done this before. A team that has won has ran X, Y, Z. That's probably what I need to address in order to win. But like more specifically, I think it's like about like, the kinds of exercises that we've done at the beginning, right? So for example, like you write down arguments. So for example, if you go back to the Greece notion, oh no, shit. If you go back to the Greece notion, right? You write down your arguments, and you have like 3 arguments, right? Then like just interrogating what makes those arguments important, and being like, okay, so what are the flaws with this? What's the op gonna say? And you go, oh shit, they might say it's not gonna work. So if I show it's gonna work, right? Like this is like where I win the debate, right? So sort of interrogating what the flaws with your arguments are, especially what are the flaws with your arguments as a collection of arguments rather than like separately, right? That allows you to like identify like underlying assumptions under your case rather than specific arguments. I realize it sounds like incredibly fucking vague, but like hopefully like if you interrogate your arguments and try and find a rebuttal to them or like try and make them stronger, like and look for common things in your arguments that allows you to identify some things that are common to them, right? Again, like as we did like with the second notion, right? I feel like recognizing, for example, that the key issue is going to be, is a strike going to be important? And also, like, why are we talking about immigrants? What is so common to all immigrants, right? Like, sort of phrase as 2 separate questions. And here the strategy is a bit different, right? You're not looking for an underlying assumption on their arguments. You're sort of looking for a subset of people to whom this applies, right? You're looking for a stakeholder that you're gonna focus your case around, right? So the strategy is a bit different, right? But arriving at that central question is quite similar, right? It's just going, what is going to make my arguments effective, and like where is this debate going to go? What are they going to say, and what do I say, and where do those things clash? And once you recognize where they clash, you recognize like what the argument has to be in order to resolve the clash, and in order to make you win the debate. Does that like at least partially answer it? But like part of it is like unfortunately just going to be like, you've done a lot of debates, you've seen a lot of debates, and like you can sort of like feel where the debate's gonna go.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the question like if you in what like how would you use authority to strengthen your point? For example, if this has been like a recent case, exactly what the point you are trying to make in a good news.
So just like with an example, like with a
exactly.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So like if you think that like the underlying mistake that the other side's making or like whatever like pertains to something that's just been like recently in the news or that you can factually show is wrong, then definitely do that, right? Because like factual claims are going to be stronger than like hypothetical claims, right?
Yeah, and then like the question related to that, like how would you weigh out like different news sources? Let's say so, because every news source.
I mean, I think there's like this implicit consensus in debating like what are credible news sources, which I think is probably quite unfortunate. But I think like as long as like you quote like a reliable Western newspaper, you should probably be fine, right? Maybe don't like quote like Chinese state media, unless like the whole point is to say what Chinese state media.
Okay, yeah. So like, what would you think are like reliable sources?
I don't know, like The Economist, BBC, or Reuters. I don't have a list.
Yeah, no,
but like any like sort of like independent like. Probably like European or American newspaper or like Al Jazeera or like I quite shamefully don't know enough newspapers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but I imagine there are plenty. So yeah, like unless it's like written by like a regime we know is like somewhat authoritarian, or unless it's written by someone we know has a very strong political bias. So like Breitbart, for example, like probably not the most reliable source, right? That then you probably wouldn't want to bring it in for factual claims.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay, so overall we have two options, well actually three. One, go wherever, either hang out in the city or go home. B, go downstairs because there is quite a lot of like loud music and the whole Liberation Day stuff. Or C, stay in here, we're going to play some music, we can stay here for more and just like if you want to chat and have a drink. And it's like mid-fellow debaters, we are going to stay here too.